I'm really excited about this one. So for this panel, uh, we're asking a couple of questions. And among these are, is there a correct path to break into the comic book industry? How do you get the attention of publishers? Do you need to get a degree in writing or art to do it? And you can learn the answers of these questions from our panelists who kind of run the spectrum from the publishing side, from different kinds of publishers, and also artists who have worked with different publishers and, explored and done things with different media. And yeah, it's really exciting. So stick around. I want to introduce our moderator of the panel, Sara Gómez-Woolley, who you might recognize from the last panel. And along with her, our panelists for today, including Alitha Martinez, who you also might recognize from the last panel. We have Sara Gómez-Woolley, Alitha Martinez, Liz Francis, and Cebulski. Together, they are editors, teachers, artists, advocates, all sorts of things. So we're going to invite them onto the stage, take your seats, and make sure that we're going. Move off this way.
Before you sit.
Yeah, is there somewhere you prefer in order?
Just sit right here. I don't care.
Yep.
Okay. Prize position, the one next to the dog.
Alrighty, y'all. So Sara Gómez-Woolley is an award-winning Latina illustrator, graphic novelist, and illustrator and educator, living and working in New York, but based in Brooklyn. Alitha is a 22-year veteran of the comic book industry who works with a great many publishers, including one that's also represented on this panel in the form of Cebulski, who's the editor-in-chief of Marvel. And we also have Liz Francis, who is the editor-in-chief of Street Noise Books. We were graced by several people who had worked with you, who were published through your press earlier in our first panel. So I'm really excited for this one. I'm going to pass you the mic.
Okay.
All right, so we had a little brief introduction of each of our incredible panelists, but I'm also going to ask that they introduce themselves. And the reason for this is we specifically chose these incredible panelists to represent different aspects of the comic book industry. We have comics have many different jobs in them as well as many different paths. And so represented here is a palette of that. And so if you could each introduce yourself as well as what your role is within the comics industry.
Thanks for coming, everyone. My name is Cebulski, and I currently serve as the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. Over my course of my career in comics, I've had many different roles, though, which I could speak to for people who are interested, because comics is what we're here for, is about creation, but there's lots of other different positions in the comic book industry. And I've been an editor, talent scout, I've done marketing, I ran Marvel Asia for a while, and I've connected with all different kinds of divisions and companies throughout this great industry that we all work in. So can speak to a lot of different stuff outside of just writing and drawing, which what we are mainly here for, I'm assuming.
I'm Liz Francis, and I am the publisher and founder of Street Noise Books. I was a book designer for many years at different big publishers, Penguin, Macmillan, and lastly Scholastic, and then I became an art director. And I left Scholastic to pursue a dream of mine, which was to start my own publishing company. I wanted to see what would happen if I followed my instincts and my heart and published things that were a little more risky than what the mainstream publishers were willing to do. It also came right around the time that Trump was elected, and I felt that I was really distraught, and I felt like I hadn't done enough in my life to prevent something like Donald Trump being elected, and to prevent all the systems that were in place that I inadvertently contributed to. And so I said, what can I do to help? And I thought, I can make books. That's what I know how to do. I also really, really, really believe in the power of stories. And Street Noise focuses primarily on graphic novels, and we do nonfiction graphic novels. So it's basically mostly memoir, nonfiction graphic novel memoir. So I have a very different experience because I'm not from the comic book world. I come at it from the book world and the book publishing world.
Hello, my name is Alitha Martinez, and I'm a comic book artist. I've been drawing comics for 23 years professionally. My first major book was Iron Man. Currently, I'm on Nubia and the Amazons. I think she's now Nubia in the Justice League. Not sure. So as you say, I jump around, and I always say that Marvel's my home, but DC's my nation. And that means I go everywhere. I go, because this is what I do. But unfortunately, I'm one of those kids that started who was always told no. This was not for you. For many, many, many reasons. And I did not take that no. I took my duffel bag and a guitar and moved to New York, and I turned that into a career that I have literally worked in my entire adult life.
Oh man, Alitha, you're jumping into the next question for me. So thank you so much for making it so easy. So the first thing was, what is your early exposure to the comic book medium? And that's for all of you guys. But the second question is, working in comics something you always wanted to do, or did you fall into it? All right, so the first question again, what was your early exposure to comics? And, was this something you consciously chose, or did you kind of fall into it?
Just go down the line then?
Yeah, let's go down the line.
My early exposure to comics was through my cousins originally. My mother's from Sweden, so we'd go over to Europe every summer to spend with my cousins. So I got into a lot of European comics when I was very, very young. And my first exposure to American comics was either through Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, Spider-Man on the Electric Company, and then also X-Men comics. X-Men 121 was the first comic I bought when I was a kid at the Five and Dime with my grandfather back in the day. So I was a comic book reader for life from that day forward, from 1977. And then, for me, I always knew I wanted to work in comics. Like, that was the dream. That was the goal. Like, I wish there was a panel like this when I was younger so I could have gotten advice. I remember I was reading comics a lot, and then, my father at one point called me and I was in another room. He said, "Oh, CB, you got to come in. You got to see this thing on TV." And I walk in, and there's this old guy on TV. And I was like, "Dad, what's this?" And he goes, "Oh, that's George Lucas. He created Star Wars." And I said, "What do you mean he created Star Wars?" He said, "Oh, that's the guy that wrote the story and directed the movie." And I said, "Really? There's people behind it?" And it was the first time that went off.
Right?
And then I went and looked at, from that day forward, at my comic collection. I would look, it was, Chris Claremont and John Byrne and, John Romita, Stan Lee, of course, became the idol. And I was like, that's something that I want to do. And I had a very roundabout path to get there. But yes, I didn't fall into comics. I always knew I wanted to work in it, and someday I would make that happen. And we can get into the hows and whys after. So.
As I said earlier, I didn't come into this as a comic book person. I read Archie comic books as a kid, and I loved the Adam West version television show Batman when I was about 5. I made the guy down the hall. He had to be Robin because I always had to be Batman.
Yes.
But I wasn't a comic book person. I was a book person. But I think the thing that really moved me in the direction of comics or graphic novels was, there's an amazing memoir by David Small called Stitches. And it just blew my mind. My daughter gave it to me because she was studying and she had it to read it for a class. And she said, "Mom, I think you would really like this." And it just blew my mind, the way that the pictures could just stop you in your tracks and could communicate what it felt like to be a little kid and have your mom, in the story, his mom was like getting more and more and more angry. I remember on one page, and you just saw her face like subtly change, and it's from this angle of the little kid looking up at her. And I just remember like, it just took my breath away. I had to put the book down and walk away for a while. And I was like, that's amazing. Like, I love books. I love reading, language. But this ability that the pictures had to just really bring me into the story blew my mind. So that's what inspired me to start reading graphic novels and then ultimately start Street Noise Books.
I'm just going to ask one follow-up question to you, Liz.
Yeah.
Since you're saying that you are a book person who then moved into graphic novels, but I know you're also an art director, correct?
Right.
So why graphic novels and not picture books? What's drawing you specifically to the comic book medium? Or are you just one foot in one camp, one foot in the other, which is how I identify?
Yeah.
So.
Well, when I was at Scholastic, I didn't do picture books. I did graphic novels. I did early chapter books. There's a series called Branches that I helped to start, and I was the art director when it formed. And I love that combination of words and pictures. I appreciate picture books, but I never was really good at art directing them. Like I just don't quite have, I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah. And I happen to, since I've fallen in love with comics people, with the comics world, with Comic Cons, with zine fests, I just feel like it's a very inclusive community. I love that sort of embrace your weird, side to it. Like the fact that it's, I don't know, I'm very, very comfortable and happy in the comics world now.
So, Alitha, you told us a little bit that you did not just fall into comics, which is essentially the beginning of the question, and that working in comics is, in fact, something you always wanted to do. But can you tell us a little bit about that very early start?
Oh, well, sure. I always wanted to tell a story. I did not know comic books existed. As I told you, my family, they're immigrants. I'm one of the first children born in this country. So they always had one foot outside of the country. So you spent time going to school in America, but you'd spend 2-3 years in Curacao going to school. Then they'd ship you off to Honduras. So you're just going round and round and round till the age of 12 years old when my great-grandmother decided they were moving to Florida, because that's what people do. They read somewhere, you move to Florida when you retire. And said the children could come live with us while the parents work. And that is very much an experience a lot of children have that I think is not spoken of. But in that means that they did not absorb a lot of American things. So stuff on TV I didn't get to see until I was 12, 13 years old. Then there's Voltron and Robotech. But before that, my exposure to comics, which I had no idea existed, was basically the way all people who live outside the country find it. It's not on TV, but we know Superman, we know Batman, we know the symbols, we know what they stand for. Truth, justice, and American way. Remember that being repeated over and over. Didn't understand what that exactly meant. And I come here and it's like, whoa. But that was my exposure to it, not understanding, till finally one day sitting in class in Curacao, someone brought an ashcan-sized Spider-Man comic book, and that was the very first comic I'd ever seen. This tiny little 8-page book of Spider-Man. Like, oh my God, there's words and pictures. Look, there's something, I can do this. This is amazing. But they took it back. They wouldn't let me keep it. Very sad. Then I finally get to come to America, and I see these things on TV, and they were showing some of the old Adam West Batmans, and they showed a lot of anime, and I'm looking and it's like, this is wonderful. I love all of these things, and all these characters, they die and they don't come back, and all this wonderful stuff. How do you get to do this? Finally, I saw an X-Men book in a 7-Eleven, and that was like, oh, and I think Jim Lee was drawing it at the time. Yeah, and I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. I take this book home and my grandmother tears it up immediately. These people are naked? Look, this woman's in her underwear. Yeah, so I began quickly to understand there was something about comics that was not acceptable. And I couldn't put my finger on it. What wasn't acceptable about comics? But I kept drawing them, but it's something I'm hiding. Now I'm understanding this storytelling. I want a book. That means I have to walk 2 miles to the 7-Eleven, read it on the way back, take the shortcut so I could get a little room. But there's an alligator who'd sun himself. But that's cool. If you see the alligator and its mouth is open, you're fine. If you don't see the alligator, don't go that way. So it was an instant rule. And I'd get it home, and that book would be gone. They'd tear it up again and again and again. So it was a one-time read for me, no collection around. But that love, that was just there, and I knew. There was no one could tell me, this isn't for me. Even when they told me, girls don't draw comics. And I started, you would see me say, look inside, like, wait a minute, there's no girl names. Like, well, you know what? You're going to have to do something about that. And just kept that in my mind. I knew. There was nothing else. I can't even explain how I knew, but I knew.
So, yeah, exactly. Let's take a second with that. Also, I'd love to know how to avoid the alligator that you don't see, but we can address that after the panel. So each of these amazing guests works, as we said, in a different aspect of the comics industry. And I don't know how many people in the audience are comics pros, how many are newbies, how many are avid readers. So just as a little bit of context, comics are a medium with many different roles. Everything from editors, art directors, writers, artists, and then if you examine the artist category, and if you're working in mainstream comics, that then bleeds into pencilers, inkers, colorists, letterers, and I'm sure CB can tell me some I'm leaving off the list.
Oh yeah, painters. You know, even got the layout artists. You know, there's even designers now. You know, all kinds of different positions.
So we're going to take a second to kind of examine these, and then also figure out if there is a correct way to break into these jobs. So let's just start with, is there a correct path to breaking in? And do you guys feel, either for writer, art, designer, what have you, do you need a degree to do it?
It was a writer named Devin Grayson who actually once said, and I've used this a lot because I speak on a lot of these different breaking in panels for new talent, that breaking into comics is like breaking out of jail. That once somebody finds a way to do it, that path gets closed and you have to find another way. And that's kind of a little outdated way of thinking, though. And one of the things I did want to clarify real quick is that, you know, sometimes people ask, what are comics in this day and age? And I think that, you know, you have comic books like Marvel and DC do, graphic novels that we republish, original graphic novels that Scholastic and PRH do. You've got digital comics, webtoons, Infinity Comics, comic strips. There's all these terms that get thrown out these days. But for the what we always say is, comic is any kind of panel-to-panel storytelling. It's taking a writer and an artist, or a writer-artist, and telling a story in a visual medium that connects the kind of the dots, panel to panel, page to page. So when we say comics, that's kind of what we're talking about here. So we're not just talking about print comics. It could be digital comics. And in this day and age, really all you need to break into comics is an idea. That's all you need. It's that simple, because especially with the internet now, there's so many different ways to get your idea out there, connecting with if you're an artist, connecting with a writer. If you're a writer, connecting with an artist, connecting with a publisher, connecting with an editor. Self-publishing is such an amazing medium now to be able to do on Instagram comics or Twitter comics. There's all these different outlets through social media that you can publish on as well. So there is no set path to breaking into comics. You don't need a formal education. You don't need a degree. You just have to have an idea and the will to be able to illustrate it yourself or find someone to illustrate it for you. And we can get into some of the more details of that, but that's the short and simple answer from my part.
I feel like from my perspective, if you're talking about breaking in to, I do feel like an education is important. I feel like it's an interesting combination of artistic ability and storytelling. And when I always say that when I look at submissions, which I am very, very lucky to have people send me things that they have an idea, you know, or they've worked out a proposal and they're wanting to know if I'd be interested in publishing it. The first thing I do, because of my background, I think, as an art director, I look at the art. Oh, I should say that most of the projects I work on are artist illustrators. So it's one person doing both of those things. And so I need to know, because I just sort of have my own personal sort of feelings about art. And so if somebody's art looks amazing to me or looks interesting, or then I'm like, okay, I'm interested. Now let's see, who are you? What story are you telling? But then it is really important that someone know how to tell a story. And so it's not just being able to be a great artist and draw cool things. It's also being able to craft a story. And I think that it's hard to learn that on your own. So I do feel like, I'm not saying you need a degree, because I didn't ever get a degree in publishing or art directing or even book design, but I did study design at SVA because I realized there were skills that I needed that I didn't have. So I would say, yeah, I think that you do need to really, don't work in isolation. Don't be all by yourself trying to become an amazing comic artist. Take classes, do workshops, get inspired by other people. Someone, a good teacher can help you to look at things from such a different perspective. Marisol and I were in a class with Sharon Lee de la Cruz, which is how I got introduced to Word Up Bookstore. Oh my God, I'm getting chills. Okay, this was a few years ago. Sharon and I were already starting to work on her graphic novel because I knew she was brilliant, but she had never done a graphic novel before. And she said, Liz, I saw that they're doing this cool, low, it's not very expensive. It's a once a week class. Ellen Lindner is going to be teaching this comics class. And I'm going to do it once a week. And I said, well, I want to do it too. Even though I wasn't going to be making comics, I wanted to learn because I should learn. So I took this amazing class, and it wasn't expensive, but I learned so much. So I would encourage people to do that. Sorry.
I can't wait to pass that on to Ellen. She's going to be so happy to hear it.
Well, Ellen then went on to edit Sharon's book.
Oh, there you go.
Well, my path into this wonderful, wonderful world of drawing comics is from a self-taught perspective. There's a lot of us, I tried to go to SVA 18 years ago, but I was the only girl in the cartooning department. I didn't last a full semester. For all the reasons you think a girl wouldn't last in an environment like that by yourself, that it's like being thrown to the sharks and you have a million cuts all over you. So it was never about the art. It quickly became about, you're never going to make it, so why are you here? You're taking up space from real students. You're a girl. They don't hire girls. By the way, you're a girl of color. What kind of color are you? What kind of name is Martinez? And then that's before they start following you home at night and making you extremely uncomfortable in every single class until you go, you know what, I'm paying for this. And another thing, to come from a background where I'm hiding art, hiding I'm drawing it, hiding what I'm doing, that means I have no family support. That means I'm earning this money to go to this school to be abused by these people, and I will not. So I figured out what I needed just through trial and error and put together my 3 to 5 pages of sequential art, and I went to a convention when they used to hold them in little places and met Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti. The day before, I had met Jim Lee, and he called me Monday and said, well, you have to move out to California. I had just gotten to New York, and I'm like, oh no. And moments behind that, Joe called me and said, I'm going to give you a trial by fire. He saw something in my art, and what it was is you don't know the full package, but you can teach yourself enough of it. Storytelling is very important. I teach at the School of Visual Arts, the school I could not graduate from. I'm a teacher there now, and I make sure that they understand these hard lessons that I learned. It's a universal language we speak with storytelling. And what Joe saw is I can do backgrounds really, really well, so I ghosted for him. That means I'm working with no credit, and I'm working on whatever they put me to. And from there, you're meeting other artists who you will learn from, because you can't help but learn from them, their style of storytelling. They're telling you what to do. You're seeing the pages as they're being produced. And then going on with Jimmy, that led me to Peter Palmiotti, who was inking for Aquaman at the time. So all of a sudden, you're an inker now. Time to learn to ink. So you're learning different tools, and that threw me on to Joe Rubenstein, who had mean cats who stare at you in his studio while you're inking. And just so on and so forth. I'm learning. So while I was self-taught and got myself to a certain point, from there you're apprenticing under a lot of people until finally you're strong enough to do this on your own.
So, yes. So, Alitha, you touched on sort of my next question for you, which was, what does the path of an aspiring comics artist look like, and how did you start getting work, and more importantly, how did you keep getting work? So I kind of want to ask a little bit of a follow-up. You said that you met them. Does that mean that you met them at a convention, that you showed your portfolio? Like, what are the actual nuggets? What are the little steps? If you had to give an action plan, what does that action plan look like?
Well, it was those. I did at that time. I was drawing on the full-size pages, the 11 by 17. The full-size pages. Now when I'm drawing from home, no one can see what I'm doing, so I draw half that size because I have to scan it in myself, and sometimes I draw on separate panels. So in other words, you have to evolve with the times. But at that time, that full-size page, complete art. Don't leave anything out. If you're penciling, show pencils was the rule at that time. If you're inking, you pencil yourself and ink a separate layout of it, or better, get someone else's pencils and pencils so they could see what you do with another line that you're not your own. So I had to get that physical artwork, put it in a portfolio, and I went to them and showed it to them at that time, walked up and said, would you look at my portfolio? And they say, you don't draw like a girl. That's the first, yeah. But it's weird. No one says those words anymore because I've drawn just about everything. So you can't say those words. Those are not words we don't hear anymore. Now they're looking at your story, so you better come correct. So now I notice people can do that with little ash cans. I see a lot of advertising on Twitter, but I warn my students that land, no regulations. People can pull your stuff down, and the next thing you know, you see it over there and you're crying in a corner. There is lawless, absolutely lawless land. But nothing beats those pages they can see, because these two people here are looking at your storytelling. They're looking at the strength of your art. They want to see that you can move this story. Remember my last, who is doing what? Where are they doing it? When are they doing that? They can tell that in a second. They know when something is missing. If you think you're quick as a consumer, they're even faster at editors because they are the ones that are bringing this to you.
That leads me perfectly into my next one. CB and Liz, as the people in the position to choose the talent to create these incredible stories, do you have any advice for aspiring creators? How do they get the attention of publishers like you? And what are you looking for when acquiring new talent?
All right, I could speak to that for hours, but just to clarify one of the things that Alitha said or build upon it. Again, you said, some of the people might not here exactly know how many jobs there are in comics, but when it comes to comics or graphic novels, putting it very briefly, there's 6 basic jobs that go into making the comics that you hold in your hand, digital or print. And that's the writer, the penciler, the inker, and that all could be the same person in one. The writer writes the story, obviously. The penciler is the one who takes the pencil and actually lays it out and puts the panels together and the characters in them. The inker is the person who takes the black line and goes over those the pencils to sharpen it up and tighten the image. Then there's the colorist who puts the colors on, obviously, either by hand, by painting, or mostly now digitally in computer and Photoshop. There's the letterer who drops the balloons in, because usually, unlike the old days where the balloons were drawn in and hand lettered, now it's just the balloons are dropped in digitally and the text is put inside them. And then there's the editors. Then there's also, separately, could be the cover artist, but sometimes the main artist of the book will also do the cover. My advice to anyone who's looking for any of those positions is, especially if you're building a portfolio, if you're an artist, who's mainly what we look at, or a writer-artist, it's make sure that you focus not just, like Liz said, on cool images and pictures and cover images. We really will look for storytelling. We look to make sure that you can move the action and the characters from panel to panel and page to page. So what we recommend as a basic minimum for Marvel, and I know DC does the same, and a lot of the other smaller comic book publishers do, is usually 3 to 4 pages of an action scene. If it's Wolverine fighting Spider-Man and the Hobgoblin and Green Goblin, how they mix it up, and so that you can draw superhero action and draw characters moving in that scene. And the other is a scene, 3 or 4 pages, what we call talking heads, which is it's a quiet scene. It's Peter Parker and Mary Jane talking in a cafe. It's 2 characters interacting in a quieter environment to show that you also can capture the nuances of facial expression and body language rather than just the big superheroics. And then we always ask also for 1 or 2 cover images. If you were going to draw the cover, show me how you tell a story in one simple image, because a cover image isn't supposed to be just like a magazine cover, like a sexy pinup, or a cake, a delicious cake to draw you in. It's supposed to tell you what's happening on the inside of the comic book. So we look for that as well. So those are the kind of what we look for artists. And then for writers, your work, your previously published work, especially when it comes to me for Marvel, is your kind of resume. We read your novels, we read your comics, we read your screenplays or watch your TV shows that were based off your screenplays. So as a writer, it's a little bit harder to get into because there are so many people who submit to us who want to be writers who come from other mediums. So that's a lot more work for us to sit down and read it. Whereas, listen, for a portfolio, you could look at it and you can usually tell in 2 or 3 pages how good, strong a storyteller a person is based on their ability.
CB, just one more thing. You mentioned their previously published work. Does that mean that you do not accept submissions of writers who have not previously published? And also, do writers have to be agented to submit to you?
No. To answer the second part, no agents. Some of our artists and writers have agents, others do not. But it's as simple as contacting an editor and saying, "Hey, I'd like to show you my work." But in this case, just to answer the first part, yes, for Marvel, we only accept previously published work and work with previously published authors. It's very rare for a non-published writer to get work for us. It's just the way that we compare it is, and since we're here uptown, I'll make the baseball analogy. It's like working if you want to play for the Yankees. Like Marvel is the Yankees. You don't come out of middle school or high school and go right to the mound and pitch at Yankee Stadium. You have to work your way up through the medium, through the high school league, through the double A, and work your way up to get to us by publishing at other publishers first.
Using that analogy with my students.
That's a good one. Wait a minute. So the question is...
I'll go for it. So as the people who choose the talent, who create these
Right.
incredible stories, how do they get the attention of publishers like you?
Okay. So, as I said, we really publish just graphic novels, so that's my perspective. And I guess my best... I do interact with people on Instagram primarily, also a little bit on Twitter, but Instagram's my favorite thing. This is just me, and I'm not talking about any other publisher, because let me just say I'm only speaking for me. Street Noise is a small publisher. We've published 12 books so far. We've had a lot of great accolades. 2 of them were finalists for the Outstanding Graphic Novel of the Year in the Ignatz Awards that were awarded last night.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
But neither of them won, but that's okay. But I was blown away by the fact that 2 out of 5 of them were Street Noise books. So, but I do my own social media, which is weird, but I do everything basically. All those hats, like they're all on top of my head. It's like that story, that children's book with the guy with all the hats. That's me. So I do react to people. If you DM me on Instagram, or if you like one of my posts and you say, "Hey, I love this book," or I can't wait to read this, or interact with me, then that'll notify, then I'll just pay attention to you a little bit. And I would say one of my big pieces of advice is to sort of do your homework before you approach somebody. So what I always like to do is and I do this myself, if I want to think of which publishers might be interested in my graphic novel, look at the other publishers that publish the ones that you like. Who's your favorite? Is it Fantagraphics? Is it Image Comics? Is it, Beehive Books or Street Noise Books or something? And then approach those people, but do your homework, read about them. Figure out which one was your favorite of their titles, because you need it's like making friends. You need some way to connect with this person. And I just would say that that's a good rule of thumb for whatever job you're applying for, is to learn about the company that you want to work for and go for it. I just think that if you do follow your heart and you do your homework, amazing things can happen. Street Noise does accept unsolicited manuscripts and unagented submissions, but we also accept things from agents. Sometimes it's word of mouth, and I feel like I've told art students that they should be on Instagram, give props to your friends, like amplify each other, because social media is huge and it's a really powerful tool. And so like use it to help other people, and then we all rise together.
Thank you so much. I have a follow-up question for you, Liz. So you briefly touched on how different the publishing industry is for your different positions, and I'm speaking specifically towards CB and towards Liz. And you said that you work with author illustrators. What does that submission process look like? I know that's very, very different.
Well, because we're a brand new publisher, our submission process is a little looser than a lot of places are. One of the things that I've found, especially early on when we were first getting started, nobody knew about us. So I wasn't getting any submissions. Why would anyone send it to some unknown publisher that's never done anything? So I had to seek out people myself. And a lot of what I did was, we'll use the example of Sharon Lee de la Cruz. I had met Sharon years before. She had actually applied for a job working in my art department at Scholastic. I thought she was amazing. I sent her on to my boss for a second interview, and he said no for whatever reason. But I was like, wait a minute, this woman is brilliant. Someday I want to work with her. And I saved her portfolio. I actually printed it out. It wasn't on my desktop. I had it in a folder, and I said, someday I'm going to work with this woman. So when I decided to start Street Noise, you know, it's sort of like when you get divorced and suddenly you have to start dating all over again. Like, which I've done. But
Amen.
when you start your own publishing company, then you're like, how am I going to find people? Well, I'll just, I'll dig up all those old contacts that I have, or all those old friends that I wonder whatever happened to that person. And I contacted Sharon and I said, hey, I'm doing this thing. And like, I know it sounds crazy, but would you want to do a graphic novel? She had never done anything like that. So a lot of my authors turned out to be debut author artists, because I sort of sought them out and I said, you want to do this? Like, I believe in you. And they were like, I don't know, should I? Or one of the examples I love to think about is Jim Terry, who is an incredible comic artist. I met him at Indigenous Comic-Con in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 2019. I think it was the fall of 2019. And I had gone there for a different reason, because I wanted to meet up with Wishayo Alvitre, I think is her name, Alvitra, because she's amazing. I met up with her, and then I was like, okay, I'm here. I better just chat with everybody else. And Jim had amazing art, but he had never done anything nonfiction. It was all mostly superhero stuff and sort of monstery type things, chaos versus something or other, whatever. He had done all these comics as the artist. He'd never written anything. But I was just chatting with him, told him what I was going to do with Street Noise Books. We didn't have any books out yet. And I get chills when I think about it, because I told him what our mission was, which was to provide a platform for the voices of marginalized people, to give a place where people can tell their truth so that we can change the world by creating compassion, by people telling their stories. So Jim pulled me aside and said very quietly, I haven't told anybody this, but I'm thinking of writing a memoir. And I was like, what? Wow, whoa. So I said, well, here's my card. I'd love to hear your ideas if you want. So a week later, I get this email from him, and I printed it out and put it up on my wall in my office, because I was like, this is why I'm in this business. He said, I've been shy about telling my story, but after hearing you talk, his mother was indigenous, his father was Irish American, and he was raised in Chicago, out in the Chicago suburbs, and he always felt like he didn't fit into either world. I'm sorry, I'm going on and on.
No,
but he always felt like an outsider in either world. He didn't feel native enough in his native family world, and he didn't feel white enough in his white world. And his parents had passed away, He had struggled with alcoholism and gotten clean and sober, or gotten sober a few years prior. And he wanted to tell, maybe to tell this story. And he had been to Standing Rock. That was another aspect of it, because I always wanted to write, let's do a graphic novel about Standing Rock. Like, that would be so cool. So I said, I'm totally interested. And we came up with a proposal really quickly. I offered him an advance. We were off and running. That book has been featured in the New York Times. It was a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize. That was also a finalist for the Ignatz Award and the Ringo Awards. Like, that book, it's called Come Home Indio. It's like an amazing, amazing book that we did together. I don't even know where I was going with that, except that, like, that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't like it was submitted to me. It was about making connections with people, and then people don't even realize that they wanted to write a graphic memoir until they start thinking about it, and we start working together. And so in Street Noise, it's a very collaborative process. We do a lot of editing and art directing along the way, and yeah, there we go. Sorry.
I can add one thing. Yeah.
Please do.
Oh, sorry. Adding one thing to what Liz said there is that your portfolio doesn't begin and end just by when you submit it. The point that you made that's very important is that social media is your friend. Social media is a tool. And your portfolio will always be in existence online. It's just a matter, remember, Instagram is super important for what we do too. Because even if you're not submitting or you don't want to submit to, say, Marvel or DC or any of the other bigger graphic novel publishers, those editors might find you through your online portfolio, because there's proactive editors and there's passive editors. And the proactive ones are the ones who are going to go out and look for new artists, new styles, people who have stories to tell. So even if you're not planning to work for some of the bigger publishers, they might find you. So it's very important, if you have aspirations to work professionally as a writer and artist, to maintain your social media accounts, to keep them professional and make sure the best possible and newest work is always up there, because you never know who might be looking.
Oh, thank you so much for that advice. So I'll just follow up with a question for you, CB. You've worked on so many stories about characters we've all come to know and love, but what kind of stories interest you now? What excites you about comics today?
Geez, I read so many different comics. I'm literally 15 comics a day for work, and then probably another 5 or 10 for just personal use or for submissions and things that people send in. Stories that interest me, even as a Marvel editor, are stories about human interaction. It's about authenticity in the stories that are being told that make you feel like you know the people who are in them. And I say that because our comics, our movies, everything we do have the title Spider-Man or Captain America or Iron Man on them. And that's the what we sell. But at the core of all those stories, what we're looking for and what makes those stories so relatable and why people love our comics, they're stories about Peter Parker and Steve Rogers and Tony Stark. So it's about putting a piece of yourself into your writing and into those characters. Don't write the characters you think you see on the big screen or you read in other comics. Put a piece of yourself in those characters. And the strongest comics and the strongest stories that I love to read are ones where you can feel the experiences of the author, fictional or non-fictional, through characters come through. There's a comic out there now by Daniel Warren Johnson, who's one of the most amazing writer-illustrators out there, I think, called Do a Powerbomb, about wrestling, and it's a sci-fi wrestling comic, and it's absolutely bizarre, but it's so human. There's been no comic that's brought me closer to tears recently than reading this comic about superhero wrestlers, because that's what's so good about it. It's got the facade of these, big superpowered sci-fi fantasy dreams on it, but at the core, it's a story about a girl who is looking for the legacy of her mother and with her estranged father. And it's those kind of stories that I think interest me in my personal reading and also in my professional, because storytellers like that can bring the same pathos and the same ethos to the superhero books.
Thank you. So I'm going to take this back to Alitha. In your bio, you stated that when you broke in, I love this quote, so I'm just going to throw it right back to you, that when you broke in, women in the industry were as rare as tigers in the wild. What challenges did this present for you early in your career? And more importantly, do you see the playing field as more level now?
Why did you do that to me? No.
Because it's a really interesting quote.
Yes, it's true. There weren't a lot of women in the industry. Like I knew there was Amanda Connor, and because I met her, but other than that, I hadn't heard of any. And it's so weird. Like every few years, you think it's getting better. You see more and more and more. And then I'm working on Batgirl at the time, and I had the artist working on Batwoman turned to me and said, "I thought I was the only one." And I'm going, "How could we be the only one? We're coming along, but it's slow." And it's easy to slide backwards because of things like Comicsgate and other just this push back in the industry. And very recently, even working on the book I'm working on now, it said we don't know what to do with her as a character.
Nubia?
Yeah, Nubia. And then I thought that also goes with me. They don't know what to do with me. It's always a question of if I can draw something. So it's not what I've drawn or you've shown what you're capable of drawing. It's still a question of, I don't know if she can handle that or she can handle this. And I understand that. That's why it's like, you know what? I love changing new books. I love going new things. I change my style. I almost envy artists that I see with that set style where you can recognize them anytime you see their works and I immediately go run and buy it because I love their work and I see it. But then I know it's just the same work in a different book. But for me, I have to change. I have to grow. So they put a new book in front of me. I change the style to according. I follow what the previous artist did before me, but I don't feel like, I think where you just arrived, I'm always trying to get there. So that's one good thing. You're always new. So no matter how long you've been here, they look at you like, oh, well, we're so glad you're finally getting your break. We love seeing this new thing. It's like, wow, I'm almost immortal at this point. I've been doing this so long. It's like I let the animals off the ark myself. But it's weird. Like I just feel this, and I think it comes from everything you can see clearly, because you can't see what I've drawn, but you can see me. And because you're looking at me and the state of our country right now and the state of everything, this is all they see. And it's difficult to get past this package. This package is something that has always been sort of like an albatross around my neck, but at the same time, it's a beacon. Because when you see me and you've seen what I've done, what even CB, working with Marvel, working with all these companies have allowed you to do, that means the next one behind me doesn't get that question. It softens. They are more accepted. I see young storytellers now coming in, and they immediately start with their story and how they're going to tell this, and they listen to them. They are being heard, and they just can't imagine a time that, it's like, guess what? I still haven't told my story. That's why I came here. And I have yet to tell a single one of my own stories.
Wow. I know. So that just sort of brings me into comics today are a really different landscape. They, not only as CB, spoke about, we have web comics, we have comics on Instagram, we have print comics, we have graphic novels. I mean, it's just a really different place than it used to be. But also, when you look at both the films as well as the books, as well as the creators, the writers, in all aspects, it is a more diverse cast, whether that is coming from the talent end or purely visual in terms of the character. So I'm wondering what kind of opportunities there are for aspiring creators within this new landscape, but also do publishers and creators have a responsibility that these voices are authentic?
Absolutely.
Took the word right out of my mouth.
All right.
Yes, we definitely do. I think that's one of the most important things to me, and why I decided to one of the reasons I decided to focus on nonfiction was we may ultimately expand to fiction, but for now, staying with your own truth makes it authentic. So, and I do feel like it's really important that people tell their own stories. We don't need, I get into arguments with people about that, because a good writer obviously can write from other perspectives other than their own. But I feel like in this day and age, we need to hear from the people who have those experiences to tell. Yeah,
I agree 100%. We absolutely have a responsibility. And you were working at Marvel when I started at Marvel. I remember you were on Iron Man. Yeah, and then at that point it was Amanda, Gail Simone, Becky Cloonan came in a little bit later. My background before Marvel came from manga and anime, the Japanese industry, where it's almost a 50-50 split between male and female creators. And one of my big things back in the day was to bring more female creators in through the manga end of things, from Japan with Sana Takeda, Gurihiru, Kamomi Shirahama, all these different artists. But now, as I was the talent scout, I was the global talent scout. And, we always said, Marvel hires anyone from anywhere. And that's the thing now as editor-in-chief, too. Stan Lee always said that the Marvel is the world outside your window. And, that was very true for our characters. But when we looked inside our window, especially going back in the day, a lot of those original Marvel creators characters were created by white males. And they tended to be very stereotypic, or they were learned through things people read through books or saw on TV or films in the time. And now the real push that I've had, and Joe Quesada before me especially, Axel Alonso and myself, and we're very proud, the three of us, of the way that the Marvel bullpen and our creative staff has changed in getting so many different creators from so many different cultures, so many different, backgrounds to tell authentic stories about those characters and create new characters that reflect the world outside our window from inside out. Mm-hmm. So be it Miles Morales or be it Kamala Khan or all these different new characters that we're creating that you're now seeing move quickly from comics to the big screen, we could not be happier with what we've done, but we still have so much more work to do to make sure that more voices are reflected through our characters to a wider audience. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. So we have time for two things. One is a last nugget of advice from each of you for those looking to break into the industry, whether that is as an illustrator, as an editor, as a author illustrator, if you want to give just one little piece of advice. And then I'm going to go ahead and take some questions from the audience. You guys can think about your questions.
Oh, you do that to me?
You have really good.
Thrown under the bus.
I know, right on the wheels, right up on me top. But luckily, Sarah's joined me in getting to teach for the State Department as well. So they send us all around the world to talk about comics and draw people on into this wonderful business of ours. But for all my students, everyone, I tell them three things. Something I heard from an author when I first got into the country. He was a writer that came down, and he was the only person who spoke English that I could understand because it didn't have an accent. And I'm like, I get you. You're speaking a language. I can understand you. But he said he wrote every day. And he wrote whether he was sick or well, and he intended to write on his deathbed. I translate that to my art. I draw every day because it builds that stamina. You draw whether you're sick or well. That builds discipline. And you ask yourself, if no one's ever going to read your stories, if you're never going to sell a single story, no one's going to see the art, will you still do it? You're going to do it to the end, huh? Because that's the commitment you need to be in this industry.
Yeah. I guess I'd like to just give a general piece of advice to everybody, whether you're a comic artist or not. And this is just from a perspective of somebody who, at age 50-something, decided to start her own publishing company. Like, do it. Follow your dream. Do what you love. I know that sounds trite and silly, but, if you believe in something, what have you got to lose? We're all living our lives, and a lot of it is pretty boring, and, we have to do certain things, but I would just say, don't hold back. That's my takeaway.
Very good. Yeah. If you dream it, you can do it was one of my things I always say too. But in this case, believe in the people around you. I wouldn't be where I am without the support of my parents, with my siblings, with my friends, my wife, who pushed me. We all have moments of doubt. We all, think there's something else we could be doing. Am I doing the right thing? But surround yourself with a good group of friends and family who will give you their honest opinion and who will be there to support you. Because if you believe in yourself and they believe in you, then you're doubly unstoppable in doing what you want to do.
That is some fantastic advice. So do we have any questions from the audience? And I'll take questions from outside the tent, too. Yeah.
I used to follow the indie comics world.
I'm going to do this.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
Hi, thank you for everybody for all your comments. I used to follow the kind of indie comics world a lot more closely than I do now. More like in the late '90s, early 2000s, and that whole crowd of people that used to converge around Fantagraphics and some of the other smaller publications. And it's I kind of lost track of, except for a couple of friends, I kind of lost track of what was going on in that world. And then recently I had a conversation with somebody who was kind of an expert on, he had just come out with a book about comics and the history of it and stuff like that. And, I mentioned that my interest in that world, and he kind of put it all down and said, well, that it just seemed like all of those people went away. And I'm wondering if you feel like now that, Marvel and DC and graphic novels have really gone mainstream now. I mean, they're really a huge part of what happens in mainstream publishing and movies and whatever. Is there still a place for those kind of smaller, funkier, weirder things going on there?
I think 100% that there's still a very big, thriving, I would say, independent comic book scene now. A lot of the authors, and again, I don't know the exact authors you're talking about from that time period, be it, from Frank Miller to Stan Sakai to Dan Close to Dave Sim to, Gary Groth and the guys at Fantagraphics back then. They're all still working in publishing, but there's a lot of those smaller independent guys have either, end up with Dark Horse or different publishers over time. But now there's a plethora of new publishers who are making great big waves in the independent world, finding these new voices, publishing in black and white, telling offbeat, creator-driven, character-driven stories from Ahoy Comics, Source Press, Vault, Black Mask. The names of the publishers may have changed, but the need to find those small independent voices and get out those kind of cool, not quirky, offbeat comics still exists 100%. And it's those creators who are really driving the medium, especially in graphic novels as well, I think. Because the market, they haven't been put aside. The market's gotten bigger, but those creators have moved on, the older ones and the newer ones that come in, to find different avenues to get in and get published through. So it's still there.
One thing I'd like to add is that I remember working at Scholastic or Penguin years ago. Maybe it was back when I was at Penguin. It was still hard for teachers to get to understand why they should allow graphic novels in the classroom. That was a big thing. Was that 15 years ago maybe, that librarians didn't like graphic novels, teachers didn't like graphic because it's not real reading, and then luckily I don't know exactly how it all, I know the publishers made a lot of effort to try to get them to change their minds, but what they realized is that it's a great way for reluctant readers to enter the world of books, and then from once they realized that, then they started realizing sort of the literary value of comics in general, and I've loved seeing that change. I think that's an amazing thing, and now librarians are some of my biggest supporters and teachers. So that's a good thing that's happened in that world, and Street Noise Books is able to do okay in this new landscape.
With the quirky books, right?
Yeah, with the quirky
the
books.
weird
We're
ones,
all
which is your
about the quirky
question.
books.
Do we have additional questions? I think we have time for maybe two more. Questions.
Going back, certainly for some of the younger folks we have here, there's, the old approach of getting close enough so that they throw you the ball, the Toni Morrison approach, like going in on the publishing side to speak about something outside of comics. There's the Todd McFarlane approach of just becoming a pain in the ass until they hire you. which approaches, and I know you guys said there is no single approach and all of that, but what's the most novel approach you've seen recently or that you've tried yourself in terms of approaching a publisher that was effective and that worked and made sense?
Back in the day when we were still taking, we had an office and we were still taking submissions by mail, the most effective approach for me was always the artists who would illustrate the envelopes. Because when they would come in, they'd stand out and I'd open them up first. And I saw there's a guy, Clay Mann, who's drawn Batman now for years, who worked for us for years. Every month he would turn in new samples, but he would illustrate I still have the envelopes. He would illustrate the envelopes too, and I'd open those first, and I'd give him the time of day. So it's a way to make yourself different and get approached. Find a different way to get yourself noticed, because there is a lot of noise out there, noise being other artists that are trying to get in. Because as much as the market has grown, there are more people than ever trying to get into the industry in comics in one way, shape, or form. You can access anyone on social media. And this is what I want to remind people, in that I'm on social media. Every editor on Marvel's on social media. All the graphic novel editors, all the artists are on social media. So it's easier than ever to get into touch with the people you need to be able to hire you. And that's a wonderful thing right now. But you have to remember that you have to be persistent, you have to be polite, and you have to be patient. Those are the 3 Ps. Because I get tweeted at or DM'd every day, hey, here's my portfolio. Hey, I want to write Spider-Man. Hey, I got an idea for X-Men. And it's like no. Yes, you can do that, but those are the ones I just delete or blow by. It's when someone writes me a thoughtful note like, hey, my name is so-and-so, I've been published here or there, or I have an idea for here. Can I ask you for some advice? Would you mind looking at my portfolio? Can you tell me who I should be speaking to? So just because you have access to people doesn't mean you should take advantage of it. And if you do take advantage of it, you might only get one shot, and do it correctly and do it politely and do it professionally, if we're going to add the 4th P there. So,
That is really, really good advice.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my advice too.
That's also my advice. That's exactly it. You have to, more than anything, be polite, because I think a lot of students come off with that and almost arrogance, and that is an immediate turn off. And they don't get why that is, because I guess you've been in art school or somewhere where you've been very small in a very contained, isolated world, and then you have to get out and interact with people, and you realize your people skills are lacking. And right then, that's right there, you turn them off. That's like you've got only one chance to make a good first impression.
Never heard of comics pros lacking social skills.
There's a tweet that I told, this is just an example, a tweet that I put out there was like a 2 or 3 part tweet that for some reason got picked up, and I couldn't believe why, but I was at Midtown Comics. I shop at Midtown Comics every week down in Grand Central, and I happened to be at the other store in Times Square. And there was a group of, might have been SVA kids or FIT kids, who were all like standing around oogling over this one person's portfolio. Oh my God, you're the greatest artist. You should be publishing. You should be drawing Spawn. You should be drawing X-Men. Oh wow, you guys are fantastic. And they were a very close group. So I went over and I said, hey guys, could I take a peek? No man, come on. Who do you think you are? This is private conversation. And I'm just like, okay. But never know, especially if you're out there at a convention or you're at a shop or you're trying to sell yourself, never forget that you should always be professional in the fact that you never know who's watching. You never know who's looking. Could be an editor, could be a fellow artist who's going to give you advice. So always be open, because part of being an artist is you're being a part of a community. And getting your foot into the community is step 1, but staying in that community with a positive attitude is going to be another thing that people should not forget.
So I'm going to go ahead, and I think we should end on that incredible note, because there is no better advice to getting started in comics, because you never know who is going to be there looking at your portfolio or reading your stories. So can we get a round of applause for our incredible panelists? Thank you.
Wait, don't we get to say where they can find us?
And
so
a round of
sorry.
applause for our wonderful moderator.
Who was terribly lapse in saying where you can find our panelists. So let's go down the line. So you say that you are easy to find. Where should we find you, CB?
Instagram or Twitter at my name, CB, CBCEBULSKI, at Either one, and with no periods. So, and I'm always out there. I'm always looking. I'm always happy to interact with fans and potential writers and artists online. So.
CB's always watching.
You can email, you can follow us on Instagram, it's Street Noise Books, or Twitter, Street Noise Book, because they wouldn't let me have an S on the end. I don't know. And, or you can email me, liz@streetnoisebooks.com. And I suggest that you remind me that you saw me on a panel at blah, 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 because it just helps to put the whole thing into context. But I love to hear from people, and I'm happy to talk to you.
On Facebook, I'm Alitha E. Martinez. On Instagram, Twitter, and anywhere else, I'm at AriotStorm, ARIOTSTORM, and my own website, www.ariotstorm.com.
And thank you all for being here today and sharing the time with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. And actually, I'm going to plug myself. I'm going to be signing right now my new book, which is Pirate Queens, The Dauntless Women Who Dared to Rule the High Seas. So if you'd like to check out a copy of that book, I'm going to be right over there. Thank you.